I am so excited to see you.
It's been way too long.
5 or 6 weeks, I think.
Unacceptable. Should never happen again.
Well, I mean, we could have recorded last week had it not been Thanksgiving.
Oh, that's true. It was Thanksgiving in the United States, and I had 11 people here eating turkey and mashed potatoes.
And otherwise, I've been very sick. And what else? You've been very busy
You're potentially on the mend, though.
feathering your own nest with your
Yeah.
other counterpart. You're much more famous and popular partner.
Show. Yeah. Yep. That's what I've been doing.
So now you're back with me to be seen by virtually no one.
Slumming it in England. Got it.
But if you're listening or watching anybody, hello there. It's very nice to be back. Anyway, potted history. The
Potted
conversation.
history.
Oh, Wadman, that's you.
That's me.
Um, so I've had this conversation this week with a selection of students and also the studio team at Stuart Semple Studios. Very interesting what comes up. So I'm going to do a test on you as well. The question for potted history that I want to lead with is, can we see everything all at once?
This is just a general question. Can we see everything all at once?
Well, think about, first of all, I would kind of peel it back a bit and I would say, well,
Yeah.
how am I responding to the question in itself makes the reaction, not just to the question, but to the way the question's asked.
I'm also turned a little bit by the potted history, and then I imagine some sort of flowering plant like the one behind you, and I think, well, of course we don't actually see the roots, they're inside the pot.
So maybe a different way of putting what I'm asking then is, can we be everything all at once?
No. Sorry, did you want more more detail than that?
Well, I
uh,
do actually, yes.
uh no, I think it's even, we see the world out in front of us, but it's only a small chunk of it that's in focus that we're looking at, like we limit, life is a little bit like having a spotlight on the world around us.
Well, I'm kind of going to go into that as well. If I ask you, the special nature of an artist in this context, an artist puts the spotlight on an element,
Yeah.
but that element is part of something.
Yeah.
And I've been looking at what I am, and the I being like the universal I.
Mm-hmm.
So I am Sandi Robertson and I'm 44 years old and I'm sitting in my home in Bournemouth in the south of England. And everything that has ever happened has led to this.
Has led to you and I sitting here discussing potted history.
Yes, but if I'm speaking just from the I,
Sure.
so even you as you are has led
Mm-hmm.
to the I here
Yep.
being what it is. So
Yes.
I am, as you are, the embodiment of everything that has ever come to pass.
Well, this is very much like the anthropic principle, right? Where it's like,
Mhm.
because I'm here, it proves that everything was built so that I would be here.
I don't mean it in that most arrogant way. I mean it more as a means with which to look at the collective without having to say that there's even any separation between us.
Mm-hmm.
So, in terms of art, as you say, we have a spotlight or we put a frame around something, and then it becomes the sharp focus. But that doesn't mean that there's not the diffuse area around it.
Sure. Which is, we were just saying right before we started, I went and saw that Sargent show. It's like Sargent's famous for that. It's like the faces have a ton of detail. The dresses are just 15 swipes of paint.
Are you trying to wrestle Sargent into our conversation? I knew you would do.
Well, I think it's just a very obvious example, but yes. The question is, do you think an artist, though, in that case, is choosing what to put the spotlight on, or do you think that the way they see what they see is the spotlight on that thing, and that's the way they see, and so it's sort of, it goes through them. It's not a decision they make. Does that make sense? What I'm trying to say?
It does, but I think there's a simultaneity to this.
Yeah.
So the artist thinks they put a spotlight that they choose, sometimes forgetting that their choice is governed by the things they don't control. You know,
Right.
I believe myself to have choices.
Free will of some kind.
And I do in my conscious life, but in my little life. In terms of the grander scheme of life, I'm only in relationship to everything, only. I'm not sure if this is making much sense, really. It does to me, but I'm aware of how tricksy it can be. And also, you know, other people simply might find this pointless. You know, what's the point of saying, well, I am everything that's ever happened? What's the point of that?
Yeah, it doesn't lead anywhere, right? Yeah.
And we're obsessed with things being of value or meaning something. I mean, the irony to me being that if this conversation, for example, is deemed to be pointless, because, you know, what's the point of knowing this or thinking about it? I mean, I would find even a point or a value in that just as an inquiry. Why do we not think it's useful to be somehow aware at some level that we land here through the grace of everything?
I guess to your point a minute ago, though, what difference does it make if we do realize that? Are we gonna change the way we see our lives or see the world or respond to things?
Our response to things, again, it's like you asking whether the artist is kind of in intention, or if they are, you know, passing through without choice. And
Did you make the? Go ahead.
No, we could talk in comparison, and we will in a minute. About choice, but also about kind of parity between forms. Anyway, what were we going to say, Paul?
I was going to say, did you make the observation of the similarity between these two, or is this something you pulled from somewhere else, or was it on purpose?
No, I picked these because I want us to look at, you know, can we find parity in disparate forms?
Yeah, I mean, yes, very much so, right? But it's interesting that, you know, I think in most comparisons of pottery and photograph, most people would think that the pottery came before the photograph in most examples of history, you know, where this one is the other way around.
Right. But there could be all kinds of similarities, crossovers. And in fact, you know, my question is, are they the same thing?
These two.
You know, Grayson Perry's making this in 2000.
Yeah.
And Martin Parr shot this sometime between 1983 and 1985.
Yep.
One is a photograph, as you say, one is a pot. The pot is taken from a kind of ancient Greek standard, making an urn. The other is taken from a relatively modern phenomenon and then turned into, you know, or is the frozen moment. They're both frozen moments and they're both stories.
Sure, but they are, I mean, maybe it's just because they're next to each other and I know the Parr photograph so well. I mean, there are similarities which make you wonder whether Grayson Perry actually saw this photograph before he made that pot.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say I don't think so.
Yeah, but you see what I'm getting at, though. Like you could imagine he was, yeah.
But that could also then be a very superficial thing, couldn't it? And I
Oh
don't.
yeah, it could. And humans are good pattern recognition machines, and I see patterns, but like, whether or not they're actually have similarities, who knows?
Hmm. But again, the bigger question about the similarity is that it's not just similarity; it's that they are the same. Now, people
Yeah.
watching might think, "Shut up, you stupid women! Of course they're not the same. One's a photograph. One's a photograph of a pot. The pot is sitting upon a surface." There's so many ways
The
in which.
pot's a 3D object. The photograph's a photograph. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but in both cases, we're seeing something through someone else's eyes, and we're seeing them through our own. That in itself, I don't know if it casts a shadow or creates a layer simply, but we are in the relationship of the thing with what we perceive it to be,
Mm-hmm.
with the thing that we perceive I myself to be.
Yes.
Right? And I'm looking at it. Yes, we can say surface pattern recognition. Yes, there's a character that we could discern on this particular angle, on this particular urn that might be similar to the young woman in the Parr photograph, but that's not the point. There are many things going on in Golden Ghosts. I mean, Golden
Yep.
Ghost, actually, I don't know if you can see it very well, but on this particular pot, the ghost is actually Claire. Now, Claire is Grayson Perry's alter ego. If anyone doesn't know Grayson Perry, Turner Prize-winning, living legend of kind of British art celebrity, very well known, very highly regarded. By his own admission, and not to be used as a slight by me, but describes himself as a craftsperson.
Mm-hmm.
His craft is rooted in pottery and also in tapestry. But there are many iterations of his form or formats. He's an elected member of the Royal Academy, very prestigious list of accolades under his belt. He has a particular interest in, satire, politics, the theatre of life. His alter ego is Claire. Very often, Grayson Perry doesn't arrive as Grayson Perry, but instead arrives as Claire. And Perry has had a lifelong relationship with transvestism and is, identifies as someone who becomes Claire, dresses as
Some
Claire.
interesting psychological stuff going on there.
Well, it's a kind of well-known thing about Grayson Perry that he's always spoken about, like his early sexual experience. His early sexual experience was sort of at age 7 when he tied himself up in his pajamas, and he thinks that all of this sort of informs, as well as the unhappiness of his young life, his sort of psychosexual experience with the world. There's not the same thing in Parr's openness about his past. I don't know if there's anything remotely like this in Parr's past. Parr, as much as I know, now in his early 70s, is, as much as anyone can tell, happily married and has been to the same person for a long time. By the way, so is Grayson Perry to Philippa, who's a psychotherapist and writer, also
Well, that
well
makes sense.
known.
I mean, but Martin Parr, despite being a member of Magnum, like was denied his vote. He was voted down, I think, the first couple of times they tried to get him in because people were like, this isn't high art, which is interesting that Grayson Perry's in all of the very establishment clubs of art, as it were.
Well,
That Martin
absolutely.
Parr, yeah, yeah.
I mean, isn't it always the case that we still find that photography is the poor relation, even when, there's the most scathing kind of look down upon craft? So being a potter is still not seen as the same as being a painter.
Yeah. Like we chose these certain forms of artistic thing to be high art and the others are not.
And photography is still straggling in the
Yeah.
eyes of many people
Yep.
behind all those other things. But, what I also love about what Perry says about the pots is that he's aware always that they are just a pot. But there's also the whole history of the pot in the pot. And this is
Sure.
what I mean by the whole of everything all at once. Can we see and be it? Well, if we're saying that, I, Sandi Robertson, contain every single thing until now, including you, Bill Wadman, then the pot, in addition to being a vessel that holds, as far as we know, nothing, is also in its form, nonetheless, an inanimate object that is the world.
And it's opaque. We don't know whether there's anything in it or whether there's nothing in it or whether there's what is in it.
In the same way, though, that we say that the Parr photograph is the embodiment of the world. It's everything that's come before it.
Mm-hmm.
And what I like also to think about is that this photograph is everything that's come since it too.
Well, it becomes part of everything that comes after it. But if that's true, then that's true of every moment, every photograph, every person, right? So.
Oh yes, but either that's so massive that we can't think about it, or we're so complacent about it that we think that's a dull point.
Or it's like saying nothing is everything and everything is nothing, which actually doesn't say anything at all. So it doesn't change anything. That knowledge is not insightful.
No, and don't forget, if we look for insight, we can never find it. But to go into these things, these kind of notions that, time and space can collapse, and I don't know, like the still point of the turning world is in everything. And that, as you say, everything is nothing, nothing is everything. What's the point of that? Everything is in the point of that. But as artists, we have maybe a particular responsibility or a reactive relationship to that notion. We want to fix things. Do we acknowledge in the fixing of all these things in what we think of as their space, and therefore also their time, that we somehow can stop that action, or do we hope to perpetuate that action? And that's funny because, we're not in control of it.
It's also interesting to me that, of these two, and even this Martin Parr, it's like, well, these things the photographs are static. They're unbreakable. They're a moment that's like frozen, right? But that vessel is a real thing that could be broken, right? It's like, it's fragile. It has a fragility to it that the photographs don't have, because it's a real object.
No, because we could still say that they're doing the same thing in the same way, because all you're talking about is materiality. The photograph is of a material too. I mean, it's a different type of material. We could
sure, but it's also reproducible and that kind of stuff, in a way that, I don't know, there's something about physical objects like that are different somehow. I mean, I guess the original negative of that photograph is an object in the same way, but anyway, go ahead. You can go to the next one.
Okay.
God, these pictures in Brighton are just so. I was in Brighton in 1984.
Oh, it's not Brighton.
I'm sorry, New Brighton.
Well, Brighton is on the south coast of England.
Yeah.
New Brighton is in the north of England. Now, that in itself, Parr claims that he doesn't photograph class. And I contest that. I know that what he does is, layered. I know that we could argue it's passive, it's documentary, blah, blah, blah. But he is recording class because he maybe is choosing locations that might be close to where he was living at the time. However, what he chooses to capture, what's informing that. Now, whether Parr is deliberately asking us to harshly judge these people and believe ourselves somehow to be separate from them is different to whether he's passively engaging with something that is a scene of, or almost like a parody of, this idea of class in the UK.
Sure.
But to deny that there's a deliberate action to capture it seems odd to me. Anyway, the thing I find interesting with this is that we look at it, and so many people I speak to about this photograph, particularly this one, I think because of the bin and the children, the reaction often is, I would never do that with my children. I would never be these people.
Be right next to some trash can at the end of the day in some town. Yeah.
These people are bad parents. These are the scum of the earth. All this kind of vitriol diatribe comes out of people about these others in this photograph. And are they other? If I was them, I'd be them. No.
Yeah, and certainly most of the people who are saying that, especially if they're from your country, it's just like, how different are you from them? How different do you think you are from them? It's like, of any of us. I wonder where that kid is now. I wonder if they know who these people are.
Well, Parr says, although not necessarily about this photograph or even this series, the fundamental thing I'm exploring is the difference between the mythology of the place and the reality of it.
Well, I think that's true of the hot dog one too, or the last one, the ice cream one. It's like what we think that these places are, what we think the experiences we're going to have in them is a subset of all the things that those experiences could be. There's your spotlight again in some ways.
Right. I mean, the special authority that an artist has here, though, is more like a limitation. In a way, artists are sort of bidden to record the world and parcel it for the rest of us to look at. But really, all that's happening is that an artist is actually limiting very often what someone will see.
Sure.
But
it could be that this was the ugliest corner of the spinner of the 360 degrees that he could have spun, and he chose that, right? Or maybe he chose to be there at the end of the day when the trash was overflowing.
Yes, and as he says himself, he's interested in truisms and like this universal language. Now, I would say that Perry's interested in that as well. The route they find that language or follow that language through, from, and to is very much rooted in our case of this body of work, British culture. The language is interchangeable, however. How many people's times and places have we encountered families feeding themselves or screaming children, or these are aspects of humanity that transcends time and place. I know for a fact that one could be shopping in Harrods and encounter a very well-heeled seeming family with screaming toddlers in tow. Or when we're sick,
right?
Anyway,
money doesn't buy you dignity in those situations. Yeah.
And
do you think though that in your country, obviously class is even more of a thing than it is in my country in a lot of ways, or at least people judge each other in a classist way while also saying that they're not classists? You know what I mean? Or do you think they admit that they are?
I think a lot of people probably know what social class they belong to.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people wear it as a badge to either invite or ward off others. And maybe that's not as complex as it might seem from the outside. It's a sorting office. We've talked about sorting before, haven't we? Our human need to sort of sort and discern. British culture gives another element of sorting. But I would imagine it's the same sorting again that happens actually just maybe in a slightly less overt way all over the world.
Sure, of course, yeah.
right? People who have money, people who don't, people who have old money, and people with new money.
You even have a sorting hat in the most popular book of the last 50 years.
Anyway, this is Perry, not potting, but making a tapestry. Again, all of everything all at once. Even the kind of ideas as artists that we find, nothing exists in a vacuum. We're always taking from what's come before. And this is no exception. This is from a wider series of tapestries that is actually after the Hogarth series of paintings about a rake's progress. And in this work, in Hogarth's version, there were 8 paintings, and the paintings followed the kind of the demise or the fall from grace of a young man who comes from wealthy family, squanders his parents' money. It's a rake's progress. In these tapestries, these are very large tapestries. This one is Expulsion from Number 8 Eden Close. We see the rake, I can't remember his name, Tim something, who's the character that travels through the tapestries from very lowly, humble, working class origins at the start, through the rise and rise of social hierarchy, using his connections and associations with a girlfriend whose family are wealthy, upper class, or at least upper middle class. And we follow this kind of progress of life matched with materialism, matched with the greed and suffering that we go through as humans. And again, we might scoff at this particular rake, but are we so different to him? How many of us are striving for whatever reason, maybe misplaced, to be better or to get more or somehow even just be different? We strive.
I think everybody does.
Right. So, very few people let that go. And so again, we're looking at parity of form. I don't believe that these people are caught in striving in this moment, in this photograph, but nonetheless, what they speak to us of is of our own reaction to want to strive and be better.
But a photograph, is a moment where a tapestry can tell a larger story because it can splice through time. You know what I mean?
Yes, and also the other thing I love about this is that Perry himself talks about how the colours in the tapestry come through to the surface, and that's kind of the representation, or almost like the metaphor for character at any given time. So the tapestry is very thick, and beneath the surface of what we see, it's kind of like the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
But actually, Parr says the same thing about his photographs, is that, he is working with a medium that is only showing part of something. But if we want to inquire, if we want to go more deeply into something, then there is always more to find.
In that single image or?
In any of the images. Sure. And I think actually it might go beyond that. He's talking in that case of his own work, but I think we could apply that to any visual art.
Yeah. The question is if the further off the reservation you go, the more you're just holding up a mirror to yourself instead of actually seeing what the artist was actually trying to say.
Yes, but let's not forget, I've called this potted history. We're all contained. We are all each other's urns.
I'm your urn. I'm in your urn. Okay.
Well, aren't you?
No, I am.
I would say so.
At least in some ways, yes, I am.
I wouldn't be as I am now if I did not have you.
Right.
And that's a very poor choice of words.
But the person that you were 3 years ago before you met me, was I still a part of you then?
I think so. And maybe this is to do with like a collision of consciousness as well, though.
Yeah.
I mean, in the studio yesterday, Badger said something with a science head on about, you know, I, as a woman, have been present since my grandmother's 6th week of pregnancy, actually.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So, you know, that's the time it takes, biologically speaking, for
The egg that is you was inside your mother's body even when she was a baby inside your grandmother's womb. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of other ways that we could look at this. There was even, I think I sent it to you the other day at Bikram on Tuesday. Yasmin, the teacher, always reads a beautiful poem at the end of our class. And she read something that I'm not going to try and remember, but essentially was saying that, you know, in each of us, there is the breath of each other, or the equivalent. You know, we have the stuff of wolf's fur and shark's tooth, and you know, we are materially made up, again, of everything that has maybe ever been somehow.
At the very least, the potential for all of those things, which is almost as interesting.
Right. So all of everything all at once. And I find it somehow, it frustrates me, even in myself, when there's resistance to the idea that, you know, what I am then isn't actually mine, and how petty I am. Who wants it?
This is yeah. But it also means that any successes you had aren't owned by you either.
Well, we talk about this a lot when we're thinking, you know, universal feelings. And again, the ego doesn't like it. And I can't remember, I'm sure you and I will have talked about this before. It's one thing in a kind of Taoist way of looking at the world, or certainly, like, I guess, Buddhist. You know, my pain is your pain, my joy is your joy. Mm-hmm. And if your suffering were my suffering and my suffering was yours, we would think and feel exactly alike. Right? Mm-hmm. So what I was saying is that, you know, if I'm engaged in looking and I'm choosing to see, and I want to see something that I find beautiful, then I'm not going to come up upon that insight at all of beauty. But sometimes maybe I am somehow beauty. It's not that I'm with it or that it's separate to me. I mean, an easier way to actually talk about it, funnily enough, is in a darker way, maybe. It's about something like grief. You know, I feel grief for someone I have lost, mm-hmm. and you feel grief for someone you have lost. Our grief is the same grief. Now, you could say my grief for the person I've lost is far more intense than what you feel for this other person. Yeah. My grief is mine alone. I'm not sure of that. In fact,
yeah.
No.
What I feel for the pain of the loss of my wife is more than the pain of the loss of your childhood cat or something like that. You know, that kind of thing. Yes. But ultimately, the grief is the same. Yeah.
And if we then apply that to the things that we seem to feel we have some ownership over, yeah, I think we would soon realize how ridiculous we are in our ego-driven pursuit of identifying or being identified with what we believe to be ours. We're so possessional.
Sure.
Possessional, and we're positional.
I was giving advice to a college-age kid that I know recently who was having trouble relationship-wise. Yeah, I know. And they were having a hard time because there's some relationship trouble. And I said, you know, the way you feel right now, I said, it never really gets any better your whole life. I was just like, adulting is hard. Like, you think people when they get older have it figured out, but you don't have it figured out. It's always kind of hard, and that's okay. But you know, it's this universality of it all, you know.
Well, I know that you don't like to go too much to there, but
into the woo. Dipping my toe in the woo.
Anyway, again, I know it's not a pot. It's a Parr photograph. I mean,
do you like Martin Parr's photographs?
Yes, as a whole.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's some that I like, but overall, it's like he certainly is not anything that I would personally be aiming towards with my work, but I appreciate it in his work.
I like what comes up for me and how it
Yeah.
gives me a chance to reflect on my own insecurities and, again, pettiness, my own arrogance. It does a lot, actually, and it's not making it easy for me.
Sure.
Anyway, this source of future prime ministers and where all our politicians make their matches, Cambridge,
Yep.
illustrious. Here we are.
I remember my years at Cambridge.
Oh, yes, me too.
I'd do great at Cambridge. I'd be able to schmooze people.
Okay, Bill. But this photograph, from a different series, obviously much later, 2015.
Right.
Do we have a shared history? I wonder if this photograph speaks to exactly the same points that this tapestry, this photograph, and this pot. We have these different forms, we have these different times, not so different, obviously, in the larger scheme of things across this presentation. But nonetheless, this should be in the minds of people far, far removed from the overflowing bin. But it's not.
It's not. And to this person, to this guy in this photograph, his state in life and the reason why he's there and the things that he does every day are not disordinary to him. They are completely ordinary to him. Him having to dress up in a tux and go to this ball, while it would be the most important thing in the world for 99% of the world, it might feel like an obligation to him,
But do we identify with this man?
I don't, but I think that there's a lot of people who would.
No, but does that mean that you feel different to him? That you are different to him, that you fundamentally are somehow then opposed to him, separate from him? What?
Opposed doesn't necessarily mean separate.
Okay, but I'm asking.
I think that some of the things that this person in this photograph is showing are some of the things that I would like to reduce to nothing in my own self.
Yes, but again, Bill, you're speaking in intention there, as if you have the choice.
I don't have the choice in the conceit you're making, but in that case, yeah, I mean, the problem is all we're seeing is this one embarrassing moment of this person's life.
Well, there's the spotlight, right? We're seeing the one
Sure.
moment,
Yep.
but is everything in it? I mean, I have to say, I don't like being conclusive, as you know, but for me, yes, everything is in this. All of these.
I think the unfairness of photography is that it takes a moment and it runs with it, in a way that a lot of other art forms don't.
No, but is that not just because of the way we've kind of been conditioned to see?
Yes, but if the woman in this Martin Parr photograph, this may be the most famous she's ever been because she was in this famous Martin Parr photograph, right? Maybe she's just like, some woman who runs a tapestry shop or a yarn shop in some small town in the Cotswolds or something, right? We have no idea. But this is probably the most well-known this person's ever been. And it was a moment when she was 17 years old, standing behind a thing at an ice cream stand, but this is what we know about her. We know this one moment where she turned around and gave a bad look to him. Maybe she was smiling the whole rest of the time, but everyone who sees this picture thinks she was a bitch. You know what I mean? Like you don't know. It's not enough information to claim universality.
Wow, I think I do know them.
Is she a friend of yours?
That
We should find out who she is, actually.
could be your homework for next week.
All right,
Bill.
I'm on it. I'm on it.
And whilst you're at it, call him
Yeah.
up too.
Okay, I'll see what I can do.
We look forward to hearing all about it. Goodbye, Bill.
That's actually Rishi Sunak. You just can't quite tell.
I wish I'd stopped before you said that. Bye, Bill.
Bye, Sandi.